The joint American and Israeli offensive against Iran has spiraled into a sprawling multi-front conflict that the region has never seen before. Trump has framed the campaign as a calculated effort to systematically dismantle Iran's ability to threaten American interests, citing targets that include missile stockpiles, naval forces, nuclear infrastructure, and proxy networks, though the scope of what is actually unfolding appears to extend well beyond that stated framing. Reports of explosions have emerged from central Tehran, including areas in proximity to the presidential palace, the Supreme Leader's compound, and buildings associated with senior Iranian political and security figures. Multiple international news agencies have documented thick plumes of smoke and successive blasts across the capital and elsewhere as components of the military assault. While the full picture is still coming into focus, early reports indicate that several high-ranking officials, possibly including the Supreme Leader himself, may have been killed in what appear to be deliberate decapitation strikes. The strategic objective has shifted. This is no longer about containing Iran, but about breaking it. Tehran understands this clearly, and because it now reads the conflict as an existential struggle, it has chosen to spread the battlefield as wide as possible. Hundreds of Iranian missiles and drones have struck economic and military targets scattered across multiple Arab states, among them Jordan, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and the UAE. Notably, Iran has directed a volume of projectiles at Arab nations roughly equal to what it launched toward Israel in the opening salvo. Both Washington and Tehran continue climbing the escalation ladder, though for entirely different reasons. Trump operates under the assumption that Iran will eventually blink, while Tehran is betting that Trump cannot sustain this level of pressure politically. Both sides are now locked inside that logic. Conflicts tend to begin with actions, but they unravel because of miscalculation. Trump's confidence in his ability to manage the fallout from striking Iran is rooted in a track record that has repeatedly defied the predictions of his critics. Time and again, when the Washington establishment warned him against crossing established norms, he proceeded anyway and emerged without the catastrophic consequences they forecast. The first clear break with conventional American foreign policy came in 2018, when he relocated the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Career diplomats had warned of mass protests and violence directed at American personnel abroad, none of which materialized. The same pattern played out in 2020, when Trump ordered the killing of Iranian Quds Force commander Qasem Soleimani. Analysts predicted a fierce and destabilizing backlash, but the response was far more muted than anticipated, and Trump's gamble paid off. The cycle repeated again last June, when the United States joined Israel's direct military operation against Iran. Critics at the time warned that striking Iran openly would accelerate its nuclear breakout, yet the feared escalation largely failed to materialize. The pattern surfaced once more in January, when Trump intervened in Venezuela and detained President Maduro, again producing minimal blowback and another apparent vindication. Every time Trump tested the limits of the system absorbed the shock. It is not hard to see why he has come to believe that the warnings surrounding an Iran strike are overblown, and that he can once again act boldly and walk away without lasting damage. But there are genuine reasons to think this time is different. The United States has assembled the most significant concentration of air and naval power in the region since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Naval assets are operating concurrently in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Arabian Sea, working in conjunction with combat aircraft stationed at bases throughout the theater. Open-source flight tracking data shows a sharp spike in American strategic airlift activity in the days preceding the conflict, with more than 80 C-17 Globemaster sorties recorded alongside a continuous stream of KC-46A Pegasus and KC-135 Stratotanker refueling aircraft moving through Atlantic and Mediterranean corridors. These assets are specifically designed to sustain logistical operations without full dependence on forward bases that sit inside the effective range of Iranian missiles and drones. Equally significant is the volume of advanced combat aircraft that flowed into the region in the lead-up to hostilities, including F-22 Raptors, F-35 Lightning IIs, F-15E Strike Eagles, and F-16 Fighting Falcons. Trump has also signaled that B-2 Spirit stealth bombers remain on standby, the same aircraft that struck Iran's underground nuclear facilities in June 2025. Their deployment this time around would likely hinge on both operational requirements and the remaining inventory of GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, a substantial portion of which were expended during last year's strikes. The core point is that the breadth and depth of the current military buildup give Trump considerably more operational flexibility than he had last June, and he appears to be using it accordingly. From the opening phase, the United States moved beyond targeting nuclear and missile infrastructure, striking broader elements of Iran's military, security, and political apparatus, including the organizational structure of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The shared aim of Trump and Netanyahu appears to be inflicting sufficient military and economic punishment to force Tehran into sweeping political concessions that would amount to something close to capitulation. Should that approach prove insufficient, the Americans and Israelis may attempt to intensify internal pressure on the regime by stoking popular unrest or widening ethnic fault lines in the hope that Iran fractures from within. That path, however, demands a sustained and costly commitment, and Iranian leaders are gambling that Trump lacks the domestic political endurance to see it through. Taking stock of everything, the conflict has crossed the threshold where escalation is no longer incidental, but fully intentional. Iran is under no illusion that it can prevail in a direct conventional confrontation with the United States or Israel. Matching their military power symmetrically is simply not an option. Its only viable path is asymmetric retaliation calibrated not purely around battlefield logic, but around political and strategic effect. In theory, the most rational course available to Tehran would be to pursue rapid de-escalation, as it did following its exchanges with Israel in April and October of 2024, and again in June of 2025. But Iran now faces a strategic landscape that bears little resemblance to those earlier moments. Both Washington and Jerusalem have increasingly come to see Iran as diminished, exposed, and fundamentally hollow. The proxy militias that once gave Tehran its deterrent reach have been gutted, its nuclear program has been set back, and its air defense network lies in ruins. Iranian officials have therefore concluded that failing to impose real costs on Trump now will leave them permanently vulnerable to even more aggressive action down the line. Last week, the Supreme Leader threatened to sink an American aircraft carrier and seal off the Strait of Hormuz. The Revolutionary Guards may now feel compelled to test whether those threats carry any weight. But there are more accessible means of asymmetric cost imposition available. Roughly 40,000 American troops are spread across a dozen regional bases, every single one of them within range of Iranian missiles. From Tehran's vantage point, inflicting American casualties carries a symbolic weight that transcends pure military value. Iranian leaders have not forgotten that in 1983, after the Iran-backed truck bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut that killed 241 American service members, President Reagan ultimately withdrew U.S. forces from Lebanon, despite having previously declared that America would not be driven out by intimidation. Iran wants to replay that dynamic. A poll conducted in mid-January showed roughly 70% of Americans opposing military action against Iran. Tehran's calculation is that a rising American body count will make it increasingly difficult for Trump to sustain public and political support for a war that is entirely his own making. This is the kind of asymmetric pressure that plays to Iran's actual strengths, rather than forcing it into a conventional contest it cannot win. Closing the Strait of Hormuz offers another lever, one that would disrupt global oil flows, drive energy prices sharply higher, and send shockwaves through the world economy, while simultaneously generating immediate domestic political headaches for Trump at home. Perhaps Iran's most provocative asymmetric move, however, is its attempt to indirectly weaponize the lobbying influence of Arab states, nudging them toward pressuring Trump to bring the conflict to an end. Relations between Iran and the Gulf Arab states have improved compared to earlier periods, and Tehran knows that Gulf leaders carry genuine sway with Trump, and that, if sufficiently alarmed, they could push him toward restraint. That is the underlying logic behind Iran striking economic and strategic assets across Jordan, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and the UAE, matching in scale the missiles it launched at Israel in the opening round. The intent is to translate Gulf Arab vulnerability into political leverage against Washington. The danger in this approach is that it could easily produce the opposite result, pushing Arab states to actively align with the American-Israeli bombing campaign and thereby worsening Iran's military position further. No matter how bad things look, there is always room for them to get worse.